Since I talked about romance stories in a previous writing room, I feel it's only right that I spend a bit of time talking about other genres as well, their strengths, weaknesses, and how to best go about writing them. If you should write them at all, for that matter. Today, by Lark's request, I'm talking about Isekai. For those unfamiliar with this genre, Isekai is a form of Japanese fiction common in light novels, manga, and anime that features a very standard setup. Isekai is essentially a story where a person from our world, usually a young adult or high school age male, is somehow transported to a fantasy or semi-fantasy realm completely separate from our own. This world will have some system of magic to it, or it will function in a similar manner to, say, Dungeons & Dragons or an MMORPG. The method by how the protagonists enter this world can vary. In some cases, they are killed or die in some gruesome manner, and they're reincarnated or sent to a new world by the gods. In other cases, they're summoned by the world to become a hero or saint meant to save the world from some calamity. In any case, the person's arrival sparks great controversy in the world itself, and they will often have knowledge, powers, and abilities that put them light years above everyone else in the world, meaning they will not only win almost all their fights with ease, but they will also be incredibly popular with the ladies, hence why most of the protagonists are male. Several examples of this genre are ones you might know, including Sword Art Online, That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime, Rising of the Shield Hero, The Saga of Tanya the Evil, In Another World with My Smartphone, The Familiar of Zero, Konosuba, Log Horizon, Inuyasha, Overlord, ReZero, Gate, Outbreak Company, and My Next Life as a Villainess. There are more than these, but those are just the ones that came to my head right off the top of my head. So, what are some of the benefits of this kind of story? You now know the basics of what Isekai is, but what's good about it? Why is it one that would be good to read? Simply put, it's wish fulfillment. One of the glorious aspects of fiction, fantasy, and video games is escapism, the ability to flee the mundane and painful life we currently live in and go to a new world, if only for a short time, to be someone else. That's part of the reason people play video games. Creating a new life, world, or story of your own is the ultimate form of escapism. So, to a young man who feels dejected in life, love, and overall success, the idea of starting over in a new reality can be one of the greatest feelings one can experience. The young man who spends all his time mastering MMORPGs can actually apply his passion to real-world issues and be successful. The young man who feels like he can never get a date will now have girls flocking to him because he's the chosen one. It's simple wish fulfillment. However, this does come at a price. Most isekai protagonists are Gary Stews or Mary Stews. They are often overly good or overly powerful, or maybe both.
Within this virgin of cold ore, who shall swallow even your screams with her embrace, suffer in anguish as your entire body is stabbed and skewered. I cast the Iron Maiden!
They will have abilities or skills that put all the other powers in their world to shame. They will have the morally correct outlook and approach to solving every problem, even if it doesn't make sense that they would. Their personalities are usually pretty bland, so that it's easier for the reader or watcher to self-insert themselves into the character. And even though they're new to the world that they inhabit, their way of handling and fixing things will always feel right to everyone, even if their cultures and outlooks are completely different. This is a problem most commonly seen in isekai like Sword Art Online, In Another World with My Smartphone, and That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime. To be honest, I actually enjoyed the latter quite a lot for the first season until I realized that no challenge would ever be too much for Rimuru. He would inevitably solve all of his problems with ease, he'd become as strong as he needed to be, and he would make allies out of just about everyone he encountered. This can be quite a weakness for a story or character over time, and it becomes hard to stomach as we start to recognize how boring it is that our hero will never face any problem that actually threatens them. In Another World with My Smartphone is one that Lark actually vehemently hates because the main character is just this kid who ends up reincarnated in a world, a fantasy world, with his smartphone that never runs out of battery power, has all information and spells that he could possibly use, and he can use it to access whatever he wants. Pretty lame, pretty boring in my opinion. And then you have Sword Art Online, which I know is a very popular anime series, but I won't lie, it does meet a lot of the Gary Stew tropes and its main protagonist. A lot of the harem anime tropes hit it too. The fact that he's OP as balls starting off. Yeah, there's a lot of that involved. And you see that in a lot of isekai. Now, from my vantage point, I've written two, sort of, isekais of my own. One is Submerged, and the other is New Epic. So I can confidently say that I've stepped into the realm of fiction before, and I have seen the kind of trouble you can hit when you're not careful. If you want to know more about New Epoch, I do have a video talking about it that you can watch, and the link will be in the description and in the upper right-hand corner. But the question is, what can you do to write it? What can you do to write Isekai? Now that you know its strengths and its dangers, what do you need to do to avoid those dangers that can ruin your story and make something good? Well, firstly, you need to ask a very important question. This is the first step. Why Isekai? And that's a serious question. Ask this. Why Isekai? Why does the story you're telling require your protagonist to come from another world? Why couldn't the story just have a character who already exists in the world do all the things they do? Take something like Goblin Slayer, which is not an Isekai, and compare it to Rising of the Shield Hero, which is. Why can't Goblin Slayer be an Isekai story? Well, because Goblin Slayer's character motivations and actions are rooted in his history and in the world. He wants to kill goblins because of what they did to his sister in his childhood. He has dedicated his life to destroying them. It wouldn't work as well if he were just a visitor from another world. His motivations and desires wouldn't make sense. In Rising of the Shield Hero, though, Naofumi's culture shock and poor treatment all tie into his coming from another world. He has to learn about this new world he's in as he goes through it, and his poor treatment and reception mean that he's got a slower start than everyone else. So we can learn about the world naturally as he does because he's having a slower time learning about it himself. And this can work well, but then you have those that don't work well, like Saga of Tanya the Evil. The story of an asshole office worker who gets killed and God punishes him by reincarnating him as a little girl in a fantasy-style alternate world during World War I, where she now has magic powers and a sadistic attitude. Now, why does this have to be an isekai? Could this just be told about some random girl in this bizarre world and it still work just as well? Actually, yes. You could have a girl named Tanya who shows a proficiency in magic, joins the military so she can rise to a high office and avoid death, and her sadism is something that earns her a lot of fear. The only thing you'd have to remove is her conflict that she has with God, which you could argue makes no sense in and of itself. See, even though Tanya has literal conversations with God, was turned into a girl by God, was put into a new world by God, and literally can only use her powers by praying to God, she still refuses to accept him as God and just calls him Being X. Look, there's healthy skepticism, there's being in denial, and then there's just freaking thick-headed.
We don't need a god! The battlefield's no place for that shit, so let's cut God out and take over his glorious work ourselves! We soldiers are going to take his place! We're going to put that arrogant asshole out of a job! Do you understand me?
We can remove that subplot. It won't be missed. Yeah, I mean, get real. The key, though, is to make the isekai relevant as an isekai. Not every fantasy story has to have a character from another world to make it function. If you want to write an isekai, fine, but make sure that the fact that they're from another world is relevant. Now, the next thing to consider is why the protagonist is there. This can have multiple answers. In the case of Rising of the Shield Hero, Naofumi is summoned to help prevent a catastrophe. In the case of Sword Art Online, it's a literal video game world that people are trapped inside, and they must win the game to escape. In the case of That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime, it's because Rimuru was simply reincarnated upon death. Which one is the weaker setup to you? If you answered the Slime anime, I would agree with you. One of the greatest errors one can commit in making an isekai is an isekai protagonist with no goal. This is the standard status quo for any Gary Stu or Mary Sue character, someone who has no direction or goal or desire to pursue. With Naofumi, he wants to go home by beating all the catastrophes. With Sword Art Online, he wants to win the video game and get home and maintain a relationship with his girlfriend. With Rimuru, he has no goal. Rimuru appears in the world he is reincarnated in, has no idea what he's doing, but simply solves problems as they approach using his god-tier powers. Without a direction or motivation for what he does, why should we care about him? A character without a want or goal or desire usually provides little reason for us to be concerned about them. In some cases, the protagonist's role is simply to be a hero, save a kingdom, and win lots of potential girlfriends, which can be fine wish fulfillment, but not an engaging story. Even Rising of the Shield Hero, an isekai that I think does well for the most part, suffers from several isekai cliches. Repetitive plot structures where Naofumi always solves his problems through overpowered, unintroduced, and seemingly out of nowhere means. always professing the moral high ground in every engagement and building a party consisting primarily of women who want to romance him, all of whom he's oblivious to in terms of their romantic affections. Over time, this gets old, hence why I don't have any interest in watching the anime further. No, seriously, I watched a trailer for the next season, and I already saw 2 new girls being introduced who were calling him Master, and I'm like, stop. This is getting old fast. Oh boy, and it's sad because Rising of the Shield Hero did some things unique right on the offset. For one thing, people did not like him. He was an isekai protagonist that came into the world and wasn't immediately liked by everyone. 2, he was given one of the weaker tier weapons. He's not the chosen one by that stretch of the imagination. He has to be more creative. 3, he has to rely on other people's power to help him out. Sure, his shield does later on prove to be incredibly OP for no apparent reason, but before that, he has to work with other people. He requires other people to work with him. And 3, it jumps off of like kind of a subversion of the trope about the hot girl being totally interested in him. In fact, he even points out that he was waiting for this trope. He's aware of this trope. It's kind of funny in that regard. So there are some good ideas there, but it does fall into other problems that can become very annoying. My final piece of advice would be to somehow incorporate knowledge or technology from both worlds so that the isekai protagonist has more to offer than his mere presence. Familiar of Zero did this well, as the character recognized objects or items from his world that had somehow been transported into the fantasy world he found himself in. Now, I'm not saying a person can't adapt or accommodate to the world he finds himself in. That's not a problem. What is a problem, though, is that if there is nothing substantial about the character outside of his other world status, then the question goes back to my first issue. Why is he from another world at all? It doesn't even have to be an object or other forms of technology. Here's an example. Imagine if you had a Roman centurion dropped into a fantasy world where he was asked to help a country's military fight off a demon army. What if he used knowledge of Roman tactics and stratagem to plan the defenses? Or what if you had a protagonist from our world who was a scientist? While other characters rely on magic and brute force, he discovers scientific methods to beating his enemies or for leveling up. It's not always about being blessed as the chosen one, but rather the idea of who you are being what's necessary. It's not about what the world can offer you, it's about what you can offer the world. That's what makes isekai so unique. Though you may come from another world, though you may come from this world and end up in a fantasy world that's all your own, where you write the story, where you come from and who you are defines where you go. If all you do is show up in this world and turn into the teen heartthrob that every girl falls for and just beat the evil bad guy because you're the bestest ever, you've created a very poor story, and there's nothing about you that makes me feel engaged. In fact, it kind of makes me sick. The advantage of isekai lies in the power it has to draw in an audience, to play off of the reader or watcher's desire to explore new worlds. It also helps by making exposition very natural and easy, but the struggle lies in the creativity the author can bring to the world, and in making the plot and protagonist engaging without falling back on tropes to titillate the viewer with low-hanging fruit. It's something not easily done, and it requires a clever mind to do effectively. But if one does right, it can be incredibly satisfying and fun to follow. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Raven's Writing Room, and I will see you in my next episode. Take care.
こいつ地味に厄介な。
ああ、これよくか。通りで暗いわけだ。あ、見なかったことにしよう。
現実逃避するな。